What's up, guys? I'm Dan Langan. This is Dan Can Bake It, where every week Food Network is throwing me a crazy cake and baking challenge. I've got a fresh cake box here, straight from Food Network, with a clue to this week's challenge, and I'm gonna open it up and see what's inside. Feels a little heavy this week. It's like a rubber ducky shower, and then a huge rubber ducky. Make a bubble bath cake that looks real. All right, so in your bubble bath, you have obviously a tub, you've got water, you've got your soap / bubbles. Bubbles, obviously it's not just a bath, it's about the bubbles. And I guess you have a rubber ducky. So, I mean, I could use this as inspiration, I could use the bubbles as inspiration. So I'm gonna grab my sketchbook and I'll figure out how much cake I need, what I'm gonna bake to get this bubble bath cake that looks real going. So now that I finished brainstorming this crazy cake, I know that I'm going to be sculpting a gigantic duck, because I was thinking about all of the elements that go into what makes a bathtub and kind of what a bubble bath is, and the bubbles and the water and the accessories that you always have, like that giant duck that I got in my challenge box. And I love making sculpted cakes. So what I'm gonna do is make a giant duck sculpted out of cake that's the centerpiece of this whole display, and then I'll surround the entire thing with some really cool gelatin bubbles. So here I've got my hemisphere cakes that I've baked in a special hemisphere pan. Basically, you bake 1/2 of the whole sphere, and then you put them together and you have a perfect sphere. So I'll take some ganache. Then I'll grab my second hemisphere, place that right on top. And then when I frost this, I wanna make sure that I'm using a conservative amount of ganache, because I don't wanna lose this nice shape. So that is my sphere cake now. This will become the head to this dude over here. So you can see I have a massive cake here. It's 2 really tall half sheet cakes that I filled with a good 1/2 inch of my favorite vanilla buttercream. And it's much more cake than I need, but when you're carving a cake, you always start with a larger block of cake than you need, and then you kind of chip away at it, just like you're doing a sculpture, which is exactly what this is. I've got a serrated knife, nice clean hands, perfect tool for carving a cake. I'll reuse some of these scraps and I'll push it right here to kind of build that tail shape up. So plastic scraper here to start scraping this icing and trying to get it as smooth as I can. I'm happy to stop here. This is the kind of thing I could keep doing for another 30 minutes, but I still have to frost the head for this duck. So I'm gonna grab my sphere cake and I'll get to frosting that with ganache the same exact way. I just grab this out of the fridge here. My sphere is nice and firm. That ganache on the inside is set up, and I've remelted some of my white chocolate ganache over here so that it's nice and spreadable. I wanna put a good dollop of it right on top of my sphere cake, and then I'll just start spreading it down. Okay, I'm not gonna obsess with this anymore. I'm gonna stop. So what I wanna do is use a little bit of my extra ganache, and I'm just gonna pick this cake up with no cardboard under it and put the bare cake right on top of this fondant covering here. That's perfect. That's where it landed, so that's where it's staying. All right, I'm gonna start rolling this out. So this should be enough for the wings. I think what I'll do is cut one, and then I'll just flip it over and use it as a template to cut a second one. I want there to be just enough piping gel so that the fondant sticks to this ganache here. So I'll make sure that's good and stuck into place. So I'm gonna try and replicate that on the other side. I'm just gonna let this fondant drape right at the base of the front and just roll the whole thing over. See, now you can see it's so worthwhile to take that extra step and place the wing before my final fondant covering, because I get this really cool, smooth wing shape. So now I'll take my favorite wooden sculpting tool. It's kind of rounded on one end and then sharp on the other. And I'll use that to push the fondant almost under the cake. I'm looking at these wings and I realized that even though they look super smooth, they're actually too smooth because on my rubber ducky guy over here, I see that he has some kind of like feather detailing. So I think what I'm gonna do is just take the circle cutter that I'm gonna use for the ducky's eyes. Covering a sphere cake with fondant is like the ultimate test of like your fondant covering ability, so. All right, so I'll cut off all of this extra here. Just kind of weighing everything down. So I've got a whole slew of tools here that I'm gonna use to create the beak and the eyes for this duck. Before I cut my eyes out, I want to place a piece of plastic wrap over the fondant because what this does is give you this really rounded cut. So instead of the eyes looking like they're just sharp cut pieces of fondant, they'll actually look nice and rounded and nice and smooth. I think they'll look a little more natural. Just gonna press this straight down through the plastic wrap. All right, I'll do the same thing with my plastic wrap. I'll place that over the black fondant and then I'll just press straight down. So I'll pick these pupils up and I'm just gonna center those right in the middle of the eye white. So now I wanna grab some modeling chocolate and then I'll roll this out probably about 1/4 of an inch. So what I'll do is actually just trace myself kind of like a half circle. What I wanna do here is kind of shape these up almost into like a little point. I'm thinking almost like the front of like a baseball cap. So this is the pan that I baked the hemisphere cakes in. And instead of trying to finagle these on my actual cake, I'll just use this cake pan and maybe I can get a good idea of how they're going to actually attach to the cake. So I'll see if I can peek this up a little bit and I'll kind of press this into place. All right, so I'll do the same thing on the bottom. All right, so I'm gonna let this set up in the fridge so that this beak or bill, whichever one it is, gets nice and firm. Then I can attach it to my cake. I'm ready to get these gelatin bubbles going. I'm super excited for you guys to see this technique. I actually don't use it too often, so I'm really pumped to be able to use it for this cake. And these gelatin bubbles, I think, are the perfect solution to nail this bubble bath challenge. So the bubbles start with just simple gelatin. You can buy it in those packets in the grocery store. And you always mix your gelatin with water. I microwave this gelatin at like 10-second intervals and I've stirred it in between until it's nice and liquidy and it pours easily off my spatula just like this. I'm gonna add just a drop of blue color to make this a nice bright blue. And then I'll also add some of this food safe white luster dust. So after you blow up the balloons, you just tape them to a skewer just like this. And then I like to grab just some cooking spray and I give them just a light mist with the cooking spray. So I'll give this a stir. It's cooled down just a little bit. And what you wanna do is take the balloon, pop it in the gelatin, and then you kind of rotate it around. So we'll let that sit right there and dry. I like to give these 2 to 3 coats. I find that 10 to 15 minutes between coats is usually enough. I actually have one here that I dipped just a little bit ago. It only has 1 coat, so it's ready for its second. And then after the 2nd or 3rd coat, if I have time, I'll let these sit and completely dry out overnight. If not, I think 6 to 8 hours, depending on how humid it is usually enough to let them dry and then be able to get the balloon out from the inside. So you just take the skewer, you pop the balloon. So then you kind of just use the skewer and shimmy the rest of it out. And then once you pull that all out, you have this awesome gelatin bubble. I'm gonna finish assembling my cake and then I can place all of these awesome bubbles and I'll get that bubbly effect around my giant rubber ducky. I'm gonna place this cake on top of these bubble tea straws. I'm basically treating this like a tiered cake. I just wanna give this cake some support before I put another cake on top of it. A little bit of liquidy ganache and I'll carefully just put some of that right there as glue. And then my front is right here, so I'm gonna pick this up. So this is nice and firm. I'll just unstick it from this cake pan. I think that'll look pretty good right there. So I'm gonna make a little mark. And then right under those marks, I'm gonna take 2 lollipop sticks, which are perfect food safe supports. And I'm just going to insert these right into the cake. So let's push this into place. I wanna place another lollipop stick, but I'll place it inside the bill. All right, so let's grab these eyes. I have my white highlight towards the top. That's the direction I want these facing in. So I'll place that first one down, place this one down. So gelatin bubbles in. Oh my God, it looks so cool. If the duck itself didn't look cool enough, I feel like just the bubbles alone would make this cake just like So neat. I was actually really unsure how I was going to make a cake inspired by this bathtub challenge. I was running through all the ideas in my head and I'm thinking about a tub and like a shower and I'm like, how am I gonna turn this into a cake? But honestly, I think Food Network did me a big favor putting a giant rubber ducky in the clue box because he was so bright and so fun looking that I just couldn't resist turning the rubber ducky himself into the cake. And these gelatin bubbles, as far as I'm concerned, definitely fulfill the challenge of making a cake that looks like an actual bubble bath because clearly there are an abundance of bubbles here. So I think this challenge was a huge success. That's all mine. How about that? Think you guys have a good challenge for me? Take it to the comments and don't forget to subscribe to Food Network on YouTube. It's a big slice, but what the heck.